6 or 7 years ago when I was living in southeast Texas. I was a member of the American Meteorological Society, and one evening we had a meeting at NASA, and the keynote speaker was Dr. Timothy Garner, who was the lead forecaster at that time for NASA. And he was showing a picture of that terrible space tragedy of the spacecraft that broke up over the western states, and pieces came down in Texas and Louisiana.
Right.
And he showed the spacecraft as it was traveling over San Francisco. Apparently the San Francisco Chronicle had taken a beautiful telephoto, crystal clear picture of it, and it was mysteriously surrounded by a blue light. And Dr. Garner was trying to say, well, that could have been caused by the fact that it was a digital camera. And then I raised my hand, and he called on me. And I said, Dr. Garner, could that have been caused by the HAARP program? Dead silence for about 7 or 8 seconds, and then he quietly said, yes.
Whoa.
Now, my question is, could that have happened, Dr. Begich, by the HAARP program being misused, or what do you think happened here in this instance? Because there's something involved with this thing that I don't think the government wants to talk about.
Sure, good question. That's a great question. And you know, I remember the event, and there was a lot of speculation about that. I'm surprised that someone actually came forward and said, yeah, that absolutely could be the case. You know, that's the problem when you're dealing with these high energy systems, and whether or not they could interfere with the navigation, interfere with these devices. Absolutely. In fact, with HAARP, if you are within the range of the device when it's activating, they actually have to shut down. I was up there with the film crew from History Channel, and we were flying around in a helicopter. We really made them angry because they had to shut the whole thing down in the middle of their work. But it is because it will interfere with onboard avionics. It will interfere with the navigation systems. It'll actually short out circuits, create bit errors on onboard computers, which all aircraft now, modern aircraft, use.
GPS systems.
You bet,
everything.
all of it. And so you can create some real havoc and bring planes down. That's why, on a very simple basis, why you turn cell phones, electronic devices when planes take off and land, is because these things are now fly-by-wire. They're not cabling hooking things up. It's radio signals, and these other things can interfere. Well, HAARP is the ultimate interference device, if you will. And so they are high-risk technologies that have accidental effects when people aren't really looking at the broader picture. And this is where, again, Eastland, the original inventor, was very, very concerned, because even he advanced his ideas about these technologies as he moved forward in his career.
Tesla tried to come up with some kind of a device to take out planes in the sky.
Right.
As a protection mechanism.
Right. In fact, that the very article from the New York Times, when Tesla first came up with those concepts going back to the early 1900s and again just before World War II, are cited in the original patents by Bernard Eastland. In fact, it was in part those ideas that stimulated the creative genius of Eastland as he sort of reached back in time to the concepts of Tesla, brought them forward with the applications regarding HAARP, and actually used those as references in his original patents. And one of the co-patenters on one of the key patents was a guy named Ramos, who was one of the founders of TRW, one of the basic guys that promoted the whole Star Wars concept. And when he saw the first view graphs of Eastland as he promoted the project, he immediately understood its implications, and then they ended up co-patenting one of the key patents that brought the technology into reality.
A couple of weeks ago, I had investigator Roger Tolsis on the program, and some of his clients are people who claim that they're hearing voices,
right?
Transmitted voices. Might HAARP do something to the mark?
Well, you know, it certainly can disrupt mental processes. If you go back to the work of J.F. Gordon MacDonald, he was at UCLA as a science advisor to President Johnson. He wrote a chapter in a book called Unless Peace Comes. The chapter was called How to Wreck Your Environment. And within that, he said, if we could ever figure out how to electronically stroke the ionosphere in just the right way, we could return a signal that would change the behavior of most people in contact with the signal. That same concept and was quoted in a book by Zbigniew Brzezinski in the early 70s. The book was Between Two Ages. It was before Zbigniew became National Security Advisor to Jimmy Carter when he was president, and he talked about the same thing. And what he said, and you know, remember, he was one of the founders of the Trilateral Commission, a major player in the background of politics worldwide, and he said no matter who had this technology, conservatives or liberals, the temptation to use it, the rationale would be different, but they would use it to further their political ends. The idea of affecting people's emotional state was also recognized by Persinger at Laurentian University when he said you could create a complex electromagnetic signal that would make people fearful or anxious, and then just put a news broadcast on the air, something as simple as this.
That's right.
That indicted a certain group, and a certain amount of energy would flow that way. Think about it in elections that are close. If you can move the emotion of people just slightly,
just a little bit,
you win. And this is where the technology becomes very, very tempting to political powers around the world to manipulate outcomes, manipulate behaviors. But the idea of manipulating human behavior with electromagnetic systems is not new. You can go back to the old MK Ultra programs, subjects that we cover and we've covered before on this program, areas we've researched where there's really, really fine technology way beyond HAARP that literally can transfer the proverbial voice in the head. In fact, we demonstrated a device in the European Parliament back when we were dealing with the HAARP issue, and we were able to get a resolution dealing with HAARP as well as these sort of mind effects. And Section 27 of European Parliament Resolution A4-005/99 says, and I quote, "It calls for an international convention introducing a global ban on all developments, deployments of weapons which might enable any form of manipulation of human beings," unquote.
Somebody's on top.
Absolutely, and there's a lot of people looking at it. Parliamentarians around the world have utilized our research in these debates, the European Parliament, the Russian Duma, and others, because we base it upon military records that are unclassified, major academic studies, the kinds of information that puts meat around these ideas that we're discussing today.
Nick Vegage's website, earthpulse.com, linked up for you at coasttocoastam.com. Next up, we go to Lecanto, Florida. Tom's with us. Hey, Tom, take it away.
Yeah, good evening, George and Dr. Begay. I'm listening on WXJB-FM here in Florida.
Super. Mr. and Mrs. America sounds like Walter Winchell.
Oh, yeah. I'm an active ham radio operator, and you mentioned the Russian woodpecker. I do remember hearing that. I was very active, and I am active now in ham radio, but back in the 70s, we could hear that across the HF spectrum. And I'm just curious, is it possible to hear the HAARP? We hear so many different signals coming through on HF. Would it be a digital signal like a chopper? And also, is this violating the IT regulations in terms of frequency allocation use?
That was a big debate, and they said they would stay within the frequency allocations, but I can tell you they've had problems, they call them problems, where they've exceeded their permitted limits. I think they just do it. When they want to run a test, they run it, and then they apologize later. The idea, could it create a similar signal? It depends on how they utilize it. These are much more sophisticated technologies. In a pulsed signal, you would probably pick up that kind of woodpecker kind of signal, but it depends on how they're utilizing it, because you can cover, and you'll understand this, 15 decades of frequency from ultra-low to in ELF ranges all the way up to visible light, and affect them through primary and secondary signals generated by manipulating this particular signal.
Nick, could the people who are working at HAARP at this array in Alaska, could they get sick one day because of this?
Well, there's, that is a good question. The side lobes, in other words, energy is pointing up, but there's side lobes which come off of the array that do affect everyone within the area and within the region. This is located in a very lightly populated region of Alaska, so statistically you wouldn't see those kind of health effects that you would see in, say, larger populations. You could have a statistical model that might give you something to hang your hat on. But the device can also be used remotely. It's set up so that it can be used remotely. You don't necessarily have to be physically present. For most of the campaigns, there are people present on the ground. Just depends on what they're doing and how they're manipulating the signal. And most radio frequency energy, passes through us harmlessly. But it's like a radio and a receiver. When you tune that signal and you get resonance between the transmitter and the receiver, you get a nice clear signal. The same is true in the human body. You can affect things at an elemental level, a molecular level, a cellular level, a body organ level, or a whole body level, depending on the wavelength, the pulse rate, the shape of the energy. So most of it's harmless, but accidentally or deliberately, you can literally dial in and create very specific physiological effects in humans or other animals or life forms.
Let's go east of the Rockies. Marty's with us in Manhattan. Hey, Marty, welcome to the program. You are now on Coast to Coast.
Yeah, actually, there was actually an article in an English British newspaper about actually in Dubai having some to have towers, broadcasting signals into the ionosphere, and causing it to rain in Dubai, like making the desert green. There's articles about making the desert green. The article seems to I can't find it on the internet. Yeah, but quite interesting also. The president of Iran, Mohammed Ahmadinejad, claimed that drought is because the reason there's a drought in Iran because of some sort of weather modification Dubai is doing. Because Dubai is shooting radio signals in the atmosphere to bring rain clouds down, like negative charged waves. And also, another interesting, other thing also talking about the electromagnetic field about the effect of the mind. It was known for thousands of years. They built the cathedrals in Europe. They built it on a plane where there's electromagnetic field, where people feel like a presence of God in the